Ladies and gentlemen, we pride ourselves on the notion that we are free, free to speak, free to think, free to worship or not to worship as we please. This is the banner we carry through modern civilization, a badge of honor for our age of enlightenment. But may I suggest, respectfully and with due concern, that this freedom, this religious freedom, is in many ways a carefully staged illusion. The phrase "you are free to believe whatever you want" is often followed silently by a condition, so long as it aligns with what we already accept. One is free to kneel, provided the act of kneeling doesn't disturb the comfort of the one who chooses to stand. One is free to pray, so long as the prayer remains invisible, inaudible, and utterly non-intrusive. We are taught that all beliefs are welcome, yet observe what happens when one belief dares to make a moral claim. Suddenly, the cry for tolerance becomes a gavel of judgment. Those who believe in something deeper than convenience, something older than our news cycles, are quietly nudged toward the margins. They are not jailed, perhaps, but they are silenced, mocked for their sincerity, pitied for their certainty. This is not freedom. This is decorum disguised as liberty. We are not free to believe in anything that challenges the great unspoken rule of modernity, that truth is relative and conviction is offensive. Real freedom does not lie in the ability to choose among superficial options. It lies in the permission to pursue what is true, even when it offends, even when it divides, even when it costs. And true belief of any kind is always costly. Religious freedom today is often celebrated as a cornerstone of modern civilization. It is cited in constitutions, defended in courtrooms, and praised in political speeches. But beneath the surface of these grand declarations lies a subtle but powerful condition. Freedom is granted only when belief remains culturally convenient. You may worship as you choose, yes, but only if your worship doesn't offend the modern sensibilities shaped by popular opinion. You may speak of God, but only in vague terms that do not challenge the moral relativity that underpins the public square. The moment your belief begins to question the prevailing norms about truth, identity, morality, or the purpose of life, it crosses an invisible line. Suddenly, the very system that promised you freedom begins to push back. You're told your views are outdated, intolerant, even dangerous. Institutions that once claimed to protect your rights now find ways to sideline your voice. The freedom offered, then, is not a space for conviction but a zone of safe neutrality. It invites beliefs that are decorative, symbolic, even sentimental, but not transformative or confrontational. Beliefs that comfort, not beliefs that confront. And so, religious freedom is slowly redefined, not as the liberty to live by truth, but as the permission to express harmless preferences. It becomes less about conscience and more about compliance. A faith that makes no demands, challenges nothing, and reshapes itself to fit the mood of the moment is not truly free but tamed. It is welcome only because it poses no threat. In this way, freedom itself becomes a performance, approved only if it plays by the unspoken rules of modern culture. Society often claims to welcome all beliefs, but in practice, it prefers those that remain silent, private, and stripped of any real challenge to the moral status quo. Religion is tolerated as long as it stays behind closed doors or confined to the rituals of tradition, without making any serious claims on how people should live, act, or think. The moment it steps into the public square and speaks with moral clarity, it becomes unwelcome. It is no longer seen as a spiritual path, but as an intrusion. A personal belief becomes a political problem. Expressions of faith are quickly labeled as judgmental, divisive, or intolerant, not because they promote hatred, but because they dare to assert something more enduring than public opinion. A prayer in a schoolroom, a scripture quoted in a debate, a moral objection raised in a policy discussion. These are treated not as contributions to a diverse society, but as violations of a new secular code. It is not the absence of belief that is demanded, but the silence of belief. Religious expressions are expected to be hollowed out, ceremonial rather than meaningful, poetic rather than prescriptive. When faith refuses to retreat into this safe corner, it is met not with dialogue but dismissal. The result is a culture where belief may exist, but only in the most diluted form. It may decorate a holiday, inspire a charitable act, or provide comfort in crisis, but it must not interfere with the dominant narrative. It must be beautiful but harmless, symbolic but toothless, present but powerless. And in this quiet push toward irrelevance, society convinces itself that it has been generous toward religion. Modern tolerance presents itself as an open door, an invitation to diversity, a promise that all views are welcome. But when examined closely, it becomes clear that this tolerance has boundaries shaped not by law, but by sensibility. It embraces ambiguity and shrinks back from certainty. The individual who believes nothing in particular is praised for being open-minded, while the one who believes something specific and lives by it is viewed with suspicion. Conviction is not seen as a mark of integrity, but as a potential threat. Certainty is mistaken for arrogance, and moral clarity is confused with judgmentalism. The modern world is comfortable with questions, not answers. It admires spiritual exploration, but recoils when someone claims to have found something worth staking their life on. And so, the person of faith is told to keep their convictions private, as if truth were something too dangerous to bring into public view. They may believe whatever they like, but if that belief compels them to act, speak, vote, or live in a way that challenges the cultural consensus, then their belief is treated as a form of intolerance. This subtle reversal creates a strange kind of moral environment, one in which those who believe deeply are pressured to pretend they do not, while those who believe nothing are considered safe. Tolerance has become a virtue only toward those who make no real demands of it. Instead of defending the right to believe, society now demands the right not to be made uncomfortable by belief. In this way, the public definition of freedom becomes hollow, no longer the right to live by truth, but the right to avoid the discomfort that truth can bring. Belief systems that dare to make truth claims are no longer viewed as sincere contributions to public discourse, but as disruptions to the fragile balance of social peace. The modern world has grown increasingly uncomfortable with the idea that anything might be universally true. The moment a belief suggests that it applies not just personally but objectively, that it speaks not just to one's own soul but to all humanity, it is met with resistance. It is no longer seen as an individual's spiritual anchor, but as a threat to diversity. The irony is that the very foundation of tolerance was once built on the freedom to assert and defend truth. Now, that same assertion is treated as exclusionary. A religion that makes demands, outlines right from wrong, and insists that some things are eternally true, is seen not as a voice of guidance, but as an act of aggression. Society has become adept at celebrating all belief, so long as they remain privately held, loosely defined, and publicly irrelevant. But the moment a belief system seeks to influence life beyond the self, to ethics, law, family, education, it is treated as a hostile force. Even gentle persuasion is interpreted as coercion, and moral clarity is branded as intolerance. The very structure of faith, which rests on the idea that truth is knowable and life changing, is now the reason it is pushed to the margins. In a culture obsessed with inclusivity, the belief that truth matters above comfort is increasingly unwelcome. The louder the culture celebrates freedom of belief, the more quietly it enforces conformity, not by law, but by shame and social pressure. The message is clear: believe whatever you like, as long as it changes nothing beyond yourself. True freedom has never meant the absence of boundaries or the luxury of endless choices. It has always involved the courage to choose something real, and the cost that comes with that choice. In a world that equates freedom with comfort, we forget that conviction often invites discomfort. It challenges, provokes, and disrupts. When a person stands for something deeper than personal preference, when they choose to live by a moral compass not dictated by trends or applause, they will inevitably face resistance. Genuine belief will always clash with the ever-shifting standards of a culture that prefers agreement over integrity. It is not freedom if the cost of living out one's belief is social exile, mockery, or silence. That is simply a new form of control, one that punishes dissent not through force, but through ridicule and exclusion. When people are discouraged from speaking what they believe because of the consequences, the freedom they think they have is only skin deep. Real freedom tests a person's resolve. It asks whether they are willing to endure misunderstanding, opposition, or even loss, for the sake of something greater than themselves. Those who have walked the path of true faith, any faith, have known this reality. Their freedom was not confirmed by applause, but by endurance. It is in the friction between belief and public pressure that freedom proves its worth. If a person must water down their convictions to be accepted, or hide their faith to be safe, then they are not exercising freedom, but avoiding its cost. There is no moral strength in believing what is easy, popular, or risk-free. The real strength lies in believing what is right, and in standing firm when everything around urges compromise. The illusion of choice in matters of belief is one of the most subtle deceptions of modern culture. On the surface, it appears that a person is free to choose from a wide marketplace of ideas, faiths, philosophies, lifestyles, all neatly packaged and presented as equally valid. But beneath this display lies a quiet pressure to conform, not by force, but by expectation. The more someone's choice aligns with the secular norms of the day, the more it is celebrated as progressive or open-minded. The more it departs from those norms, especially in its moral implications, the more it is treated as dangerous, backward, or divisive. This is not true diversity. It is selective approval. People are subtly guided toward the beliefs that make no demands and offer no resistance to cultural trends. The moment a belief claims authority beyond personal preference, when it suggests not just what is meaningful, but what is true, it becomes inconvenient. The culture tolerates belief so long as it keeps to private life, never stepping into education, politics, or ethics. Anything that challenges the reigning narrative must be either reinterpreted or silenced. The appearance of freedom becomes a mask for quiet coercion, a way of making all beliefs seem welcome while ensuring only certain ones are allowed to shape the public imagination. This is not the expansion of freedom, but the narrowing of it through pressure and pretense. Freedom without the risk of offense or consequence is not freedom, but controlled permission. In today's cultural landscape, belief is allowed only as long as it remains passive. The moment it begins to shape actions, influence decisions, or challenge prevailing norms, it is no longer seen as a personal right, but as a potential violation. A belief that offends no one, costs nothing, and demands no change is not a belief at all, but a social accessory. The modern world has carefully crafted a version of freedom that is clean, quiet, and unthreatening. A freedom that never disrupts, never disagrees, never questions. Yet historically, the pursuit of truth has always come with discomfort. It has divided households, reshaped empires, and transformed lives. The right to believe must include the right to be unpopular, to resist pressure, to speak when silence is preferred. Otherwise, it becomes a performance, not a principle. What is often called freedom today is merely the space left over after all meaningful conviction has been drained away. It is the shell of liberty, hollowed out and dressed up to look complete. True